Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's just coming up to 4 o'clock UK British summer time, the start time of this event. I see there's a number of people just joining the webinar, so let's just wait for a few more seconds to let everyone jump on board. Welcome to all of those of you who have joined. Thank you for joining us here. Okay, let's make a start then. So welcome to this event. This is one in a series of 30-minute briefing sessions that we do, all about sharing our experience and vision of what's happening in the marketplace with different organisations helping us do these briefings. And we're broadcasting to people who are serious about improving their performance through GRC. So I'm Martin Proctor, I'm Joint Managing Director of Integrity, and I'm your host for these sessions. And I'm delighted today we've got two speakers with us. There's Gavin Campbell, our regular speaker, Innovation Director and one of our founders. And our special guest today, Roger Wigginstam, who's Vice President of Product Management at NextLab. So thank you both for joining us there. Just before we get into the session, if I can just mention to you that if you've got any questions, you'll see that there's a space there to type your question in, and we'll pick up on those towards the end. We'll try and handle them in an efficient way and run through with that. So just in terms of what we'll be covering today, so we first saw SAP getting interested in NextLabs probably back end of last year, and at GRC 2015 in Las Vegas, which was in February, it was clear that the NextLabs relationship was very important to SAP, and they were making a big thing about it in their product portfolio. It was one of the cornerstones of what they were doing. And it's now become, as it says, they're a solution extension partner. It's part of the standard SAP product portfolio and the price list, so you'd buy it from your SAP normal account management team and so on. So we'd seen it and we'd sort of had a look at it, and we were interested in what it was all about, and we wanted to have a look at and understand it a bit more. So really what this webinar is about is explaining what we've seen there and just going through what it's all about. So we're not really promoting it, saying you should buy this straight away or anything. It's just kind of sharing our perspective on how it fits in, and it's great that Roger from NextLabs is here to explain how it fits and why it might be of use for you. So if we look at the background to some of the NextLabs history, it's been a sort of focus in the security areas. Defence and aerospace has been big, but what we've seen in the last 6 months or so is that all markets are showing interest in this for all sorts of reasons. And it's really driven by a desire to rethink access management, because we've got all the list of things there, all the sort of cloud-based stuff and third-party activity. We've got the new S4HANA coming from SAP. All of this is making access management more complicated, and I think all of us in this space have experienced the trauma that brings and the load. Now, at the same time, we've got the industry watchers, the analysts, thinking that this attribute-based access control will become more common and desirable, and it will become the standard. So understanding it was quite a useful thing to do. So if we look at the history of how this has developed over time, if we go back to the early days of SAP R3, that came out about 1992, I think, and at that time the world was full of sort of role-based thinking. So let me just go on to the next slide. Hopefully it will in a second. Anyway, so let me. Oh yes, great, thanks. So in '92 we had the sort of the birth of R3, and at the time anyone who was involved back then was involved with kind of doing roles, but it wasn't a big thing. People weren't stressed by it. It just was part of the project, really. But then the Enron scandal hit, and SOX came about, and suddenly this became serious. And we went from the sort of the early days of helping people to have access to a period where we were actually trying to cut access off. And we're all getting worried about SODs and taking it seriously. And at this time, SAP was starting to get serious about this, culminating in 2006 buying Versa, which was the birth of the SAP GRC product access control that we all know and love these days. And that's moved on to process control, risk management, fraud management, and so on. Now, at the same time, we've got sort of all sorts of new ways of doing SAP. It's not just your core ECC. There's all sorts of cloud and hybrid models, software as a service. The S4HANA world is coming with its new simple type thinking. So we've gone to a model where we're having to manage this explosion in access across all these different platforms, all these different bits of software, and access management is getting very complicated. Now, the goal we need to get to by 2020 or at some point before then is, instead of worrying about it all the time, thinking about how do we have some really slick, sort of streamlined access management world. And that's the goal, and that's really why today's session, I think, is relevant. So that's really our perspective. So it's really sharing with you a view on what we've seen SAP show a lot of interest in, and understand how we move from here. So Roger, perhaps I could welcome you into the webinar and say thanks for taking time out today. I know it's very early in the morning in the States, in California where you are, but thanks for getting up, and let me hand over to you to take us through a bit about the Next Labs product set.
Sure, thank you. So good morning everyone, or good afternoon. So this is Roger Wigenstam here at Next Labs. I run product management at Next Labs, and we'll talk you through a little bit about what we do and how that can help you. So let's see if we can move the slides forward. Do I have control? There we go. Whoops. Oh, I got too much control. Right, so we'll talk through a little bit about the business problems and requirements, how some of these problems have been solved in the past, and what attribute-based access control solutions bring to the table and can help you meet some of the more modern requirements, and also help you maintain the environment and access that people have in your systems. So, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about how the Next Lab solutions fit into SAP. So we'll keep a pretty rapid pace here since we only have about 3 hours. Oh, sorry, 30 minutes. So let's see. So let's talk about the authorization requirements. So, the requirements are getting a little bit more complicated than they used to be. So in the past, we had employees that needed access to internal systems that were hosted on the network from company-issued devices, and that doesn't hold true anymore. So everyone has a smartphone in the pocket. We do a lot of traveling. I need access to my applications, my data, and do my work from wherever I happen to be. So this could be from home, from my customer site, when I'm visiting my suppliers, or sitting in an airport somewhere. And the kind of data that I need access to is, anything from structured data within database tables through the screens in SAP to structured and unstructured data such as CAD drawings and 3D models and business documents and so forth that might be hosted in DMS and other systems for that matter. So I also need to work with, so in the past, a lot of these security systems that we had dealt with role-based access control, but a lot of security controls were designed around keeping the data internal to your enterprise. So that doesn't work in this environment. So we're dealing with globalization where I have, a supply chain, a global supply chain. I have contract manufacturers in other countries. I have design partners in various different places and so forth. So how can I share my data and share all this information with my employees, my contractors, my suppliers, my partners, and so forth under various different circumstances? We're all dealing with new regulations coming up. So there's new banking regulations, where it happens to be in Norway, and you can give consent as to who can access your bank records within the branch or within the whole bank for that matter. And I should also be able to get a report on who's been looking at my bank records. Privacy regulations, healthcare regulations, data residency regulations, and export control regulations and so forth, right? So getting a lot more complicated than it used to be. So not only do we need to control what information goes where and what people can do to it, but it could even be based on where people are and where that data resides. So almost every week now we also read the news about new different data breaches and data leaks happening, and this could be caused by insiders or external parties as well. So how do you manage all this complexity is a problem that many people are trying to think through. So to just look at the existing models that has been in place for quite some time, and this is not unique to SAP. Role-based access has been around for the last 20 plus years, and NIST formalized it in maybe 10 years ago. So this is the National Institute of Standards Technology in the US. So used across most enterprise applications. So everyone's familiar with roles. You know, there's job roles such as your marketing analyst and support manager. You have more abstract roles like a customer, employee, or supplier or partner. And where it gets a little bit more interesting is where you start having, you know, different dimensions to the role. So I might have different project roles. So in this example here, I have a project called Destiny, and I have members and administrators, but then there's 100 other projects within the organization. And I also have, you know, roles based on location, organization, territory, districts, whatever it may be. And so you start seeing more and more roles popping up as you start going through your requirements on what data people should have access to. So where role-based shines and has always been fantastic and continues being so is, you know, when you have functions, business functions that you need to give access to people, and they're sort of generic functions. So the example you see here is I have a user who's an employee. I've assigned the employee role to that person, and that role gives them permission to view their salary slip, do time management, and, you know, look at other information that's available to all the employees within the enterprise. So where it starts getting a little bit challenging is where you start looking at data. So, or access to functions that are specific to a given legislation or location or geography or whatever it may be. So in the example here, you have employees in the UK. Sure, they have access to healthcare forms and tax forms and whatnot, but they also need a data permission to be able to view other people, other employees within the UK. So this is for directory purposes and who knows what that may be, what else. So if you now think about this, so if I have a large enterprise that spans multiple countries and across the globe, then I need a role perhaps for every single geography that I need to control access based on. So maybe I need a German employee role and another employee role for people in Sweden and Norway and Denmark and so forth. And each of them will have to have different data permissions assigned to them. So this is obviously a very, very simplified example here. So you can take many different other data stripes and types of roles and think through that. So we move forward here. So what it really means is what I'm trying to do here is I have this role, this abstract role, employee role that gives access to anything, but then I need to treat different types of people differently. So, you know, what employees can do within the European Union, or if they're employed within an EU country, versus someone who's employed in North America may be different within my applications and data I can see. And as you then start breaking that down into countries, as in this example, you end up with more roles, so one for each country. And if you're lucky, you have a system where roles can inherit other roles, so I don't have to duplicate all the permissions that were assigned to the base employee role to each of these country-specific roles. They can just inherit the permissions from the sub-roles, if you will. So now, if you take country and you start breaking that down, maybe I need to now, within the country, start breaking it down into county or region or city or whatever it may be. And that's just one different dimension here based on location. So maybe I need to also break things down based on organization or by territory or by project or something else. And all we're dealing with here is a simple employee role. So I throw in manager role into the picture. A manager is also an employee, so should inherit the employee role. But then I need to break the manager role up into smaller roles for, that gives them data permissions to the types of data that is specific to their location or whatever the requirement happens to be. So so what happens? Well, let's see. So so what this leads to is really what we in the security industry has been calling role explosion for quite some time. So you end up with a very large number of roles. So it could be thousands of roles or even hundreds of thousands of roles in a large enterprise deployment, where you have very complex requirements around what data and people should be able to access. So in this particular example here, you know, when you end up with all these different roles, so not only do you need to create these roles and maintain them, and you know, and have people that look after these roles and make sure that the roles actually give people the right permissions in the system. But you also have to have processes in place that assign these roles to people as they move into different jobs or different functions or between different departments or whatever it may be. And as they move out, these roles also need to be deprovisioned or revoked from those users. So this works great if you have a few handful of roles or, you know, hundreds of roles, but, you know, as you start going up into thousands or more, then this becomes very, very difficult and expensive. So, you know, so another problem and challenge we have with role-based access, and a lot of people have been trying to solve, and not really successfully, is when you deal with dynamic context. So I might have need to give access to people or revoke access to users based on things that come into existence at the blink of an eye and disappears a few minutes later. So this could be anything from your location to, you know, the risk score or market volatility or something like that, depending on what device I'm accessing the system from, what network that happens to be through. Even during business hours, maybe some users can do something, but not during after hours, if you will. And then you have, you know, scheduled events like the fiscal quiet period. So maybe the last 2 weeks before you're going to report your fiscal results, you need to shut off access to certain financial functions to a set of users because you're calculating and trying to come up with whatever your corporate results are, financial results are. So there's many of these examples, and unfortunately, role-based access, it doesn't really work because these roles are not something that you can just assign at the whim to a user because they don't exist. They come into existence at the blink of an eye and then disappear again. So it's really based on dynamic, they really refer to dynamic context. So, oops, let me see if this slide gets stuck there. So the conclusion really here is, you know, so unfortunately, RBAC is role-based access is good for many things, and especially a function-based access. But it's a static security model, and as such, you know, what we saw also, it unfortunately has some challenges when it comes to how you, the administration of the model. So creating, maintaining roles, making sure they actually give you the right set of permissions, and assigning and revoking these roles to people is going to be a pretty hefty, heavy-duty exercise. And unfortunately, roles don't really work for some of the more interesting requirements that we're all dealing with these days. So maybe I should give access to people when they sit at their desk at work to certain information, and they can view the information, that they can approve it and edit it or whatever it may be. But if they go on the road and access that same information from you know, a mobile device, and I'm sitting at an airport in Singapore, or I'm outside, I'm doing geofencing for some reason around the boundaries of the hospital, then maybe I shouldn't even be able to view that information, or maybe I should only be able to view it but not change it. So there's a lot of those different types of requirements that people come to us and see if we can solve them for them. So what we bring to the table is something called attribute-based access control. So attribute-based access has actually been around for a while, and it doesn't replace role-based access control, and I want to stress that. So it augments it. So what is attribute-based access? It's really taking anything about the user or the environment or the resources, so the data or the business functions or applications and so forth that you want to protect. Any information about any of those three things, and being able to define rules and policies that describe what people can do under what conditions. So an attribute is anything from the user's age to their device, to whether the device is jailbroken, to the sensitivity of a document, to or how it's classified, the citizenship of the user, how I access the system, and so forth. So these are all attributes. So if you then take all these attributes, so attributes can come from any source. So they can come from your HR system, they can come from your LDAP directory, they can be stored with the application itself, with the transaction and the data that you're dealing with. And you can then take all that information, make it available to an ABAC policy engine, and write policies around attributes. So in this particular example, very simple example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in my policy, using just English language here, is I'm going to allow citizens in the UK to view and edit secret and top secret documents if the end user's security clearance is higher or equal to than the sensitivity classification of the document. So that means that the user has to, if the document is classified as secret, then in this example here, the user has to have either a top secret or secret clearance in order to view that. And I also threw in, for good measure here, authentication schemes and environmental factors. So how did the user authenticate, log into the system? So in this case, it was probably a biometric or a multi-factor type of authentication, maybe of some sort. So if you try to do something like this with role-based access control, it would be quite hard, and you would end up with probably a lot of different roles. So so how we break it up? In an ABAC policy is you have a policy effect. The effect is either allow or deny, and then you're allowing or denying a set of subjects, users. So it could be just any user, it could be a group, a role, or users identified by some attributes, their age or location or department or whatever it may be. And then I grant a set of actions, so the operations that these users should be allowed or denied on some resources. In this particular case, it happens to be documents that are identified by the sensitivity, and it's either secret or top secret. And I'm only going to allow this if the end user's clearance, which is a user attribute, is greater or equal to the resource attribute here in the document sensitivity, so which happens to be stored in the SAP system or in your content management system or maybe in the document itself. And the user citizenship is equal to UK, and they logged in through multi-factor. So anyway, so this is really the core of what attribute-based access control, being able to describe a policy, basically a rule, using any attribute that you can possibly think of, and that's what Next Labs brings to the table and adds to the SAP environment. So this example here is obviously simplified, but we have one policy that, in this example here, applies to all users, which happens to be UK citizens, and all documents that happen to be secret and top secret documents in a single statement. So so much more simpler to manage and then be able to review and audit after the fact. So let's move on here. So what can you do with ABAC? So there's a lot of different things. So one is we can actually take any business transaction. So we can not only control that, is this user allowed to submit an order, or is this user allowed to whatever it may be. So we can also control, is this user allowed to submit this particular order for this customer, for this amount, for the following set of order items that are attached to the order. So taking all the information about the order, comparing it to who the end user is, how they actually submitted the order, is it through their mobile device or through some other means, and who are they submitting it on behalf of. So that's an example of using attribute-based access for controlling business transactions. Another example is doing data filtering. So what data am I allowed to see in the system? So when I go to any of the screens within the environment, so not only can we filter data based on the very coarse-grained, predefined attributes like organizations or whatever, but I can take any element of the data, any attribute of the data, and make a decision on whether we should let you see that record of data, that row. So maybe an order or a customer record, or the particular item in the inventory based on something about that record. And not only can we control what data you can see, but also what operations you can perform in that data. So can I view it? Can I approve it? Can I delete it? Can I update it? Can I forward it and share it with my colleagues and friends, for example? So once we show you, decide that we're going to display a particular piece of data to you, we can also redact elements of that data on a as-needed basis. So if we have employee records as an example, so maybe we have a policy that says that any user can access any other employee records within the system for the purpose of looking at contact details, so phone numbers and email addresses. But and managers happens to be using that same screen. So we can determine that if I'm a manager, I'm actually also allowed to view the national identifier and date of birth and salary for each of the employees that report to me, but I can't do that for other employees that I happen to be able to view in the same system. So that's really redacting elements of data. And then we can take this a step further. So not only can we control the information within the SAP environment, but when we take it out of SAP as well. So if I have documents stored in DMS, and this could be business documents, or it could even be CAD drawings, so maybe RH and VDS files using Visual Enterprise, or maybe my Siemens NX documents or JT documents, whatever, CAD models or whatever it may be. So we can put a security envelope around these documents when they get created, when they get stored in DMS, and when you take them out and share them with your design partners and suppliers, we can control who can actually access that data under what conditions and what they can do with it. So there's some additional use cases there. And like I already described, we can do this for both structured data and unstructured data of any kind, and we can control under what conditions you can perform these operations, and you can see the different types of information. So let's see, what else do we have here? Yeah, so we're not the only ones that have been thinking about attribute-based access control. So there's a lot of excitement from various different industry analysts. So Gartner's has a prediction that by 2020, 70% of all businesses will be using attribute-based access control. And Kuppinger Cole, one of the German analysts, have actually been doing a lot of good research and written quite a lot of documents about attribute-based access control and what they refer to as dynamic authorization. And then we have a organization here in the U.S., the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They came out with a guide to attribute-based access control last year, which is basically a recommendation to the organizations here to start leveraging this mechanism for authorization purposes. So we are working very, very closely with NIST today to come up with an attribute-based access control ABAC reference architecture, and you'll see the fruit of that work pretty soon. So let's see. So the conclusion here on ABAC is it's a very flexible security model. So as you can see, some of the use cases and policies that I described, and they've really been simplified for the purpose of this presentation here. And you can really define any policy to meet whatever your business requirements happen to be. The only thing that is required is we need to be able to get hold of the attributes that you want to leverage in your policy. And those attributes can come from the application, it can come from any external data source within the outside of your SAP environment or within the SAP environment. And we have ways of dynamically going and grabbing those attributes. And we also have some other techniques for grabbing the attributes ahead of time from your identity sources, so your directories and other places. And so where in the RBAC case, in a very, very complex environment, you may end up with thousands or hundreds of thousands of roles. In an ABAC world, you may end up with, tens or maybe 100 policies to meet exactly the same requirement at the very most. So most deployments we see are no more than that. And again, this doesn't really replace role-based access. We can leverage roles in your attribute-based policies as one of the attributes. So a role is just an attribute, and roles still have a place for function access and so forth, and probably simpler scenarios as well. So I think that was, we go quickly into how NextLab solves some of these problems in SAP. So the core of our solution is what we call control centers. This is our ABAC platform where I can define policies. I have an inventory or a registry of attributes and resources and other things, and then I define policies similar to what you saw earlier, and with the policy effect and the rules and so forth. When I'm happy with those policies, I deploy them, which means I publish them and make them effective to the authorization engine. And when users access the SAP environment, those policies are evaluated by the engine and then enforced by the SAP environment. So one thing we haven't really talked about is you can also go and look at reports on what actually the user activity is. So I can have full control and insight into what people are actually doing within my environment, what resources and so forth, what people are doing. So from a compliance and regulation point of view, we provide a lot of functionality there as well. So this is really how that fits into the SAP environment. So control center sits underneath. Then we have the SAP dynamic authorization module that sits underneath the SAP environment and injects itself into the ECC and PLM and CRM environments and so forth, and then provides different types of control that we've been talking about. So data segregation for data residency type reasons, access control, auto compliance, and we can also classify information using the same policies. So that's probably not something for this session either. But what I also just want to mention is, and we do get some of these questions, is how does this work with GRC? So the SAP Dynamic Authorization, the reason it's called SAP Dynamic Authorization is that it's actually SAP is now selling this on their paper. So SAP has chosen NextLab as the ABAC solution for SAP. So we have integrated that with GRC. So any attributes that are managed within GRC can be leveraged in your ABAC policies. Without you doing anything, you just need to write the policies and describe what attributes, how you want to write these rules. We can also extend the SOD controls that GRC provides. So GRC says users can have this role, but not that role, and so forth, and define different risk mitigation controls around that. We can actually enforce dynamic risk mitigation controls. So I might need to be able to give a user access to create vendors, but also be able to pay vendors. So in the normal SOD case, that's a SOD violation, separation of duties violation. But what we can do here is really at the transaction level, making sure that you can't pay the vendor that you created, but you can pay all the other vendors. So that's really the dynamic part of it, right? So doing it at a really fine-grained level and therefore opening up, helping people do their jobs. And then we're add on to the compliance reporting that GRC provides. So that was all from me today. So I'll hand back over to my friends here.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Roger. That was a very good and fast run through quite a lot of material there. So just quickly to summarise, I'm conscious that we were slightly over time here, so I'll ask Gavin if he would just sort of stand down and we'll quickly run through this. We're making the point that things have changed a lot. There's a really good reason to have a look at this alternative approach to how we manage access management. And on the next slide, we just kind of summarise the changes that are happening in the world in terms of the way the technology is changing. S4HANA, I think, will change SAP's view of the world, and it will drive this sort of need to think about things in a simpler and faster and a better way. And Next Labs, I think, will be a key part of that. I don't think we've had any questions from the floor, as it were. We did have some pre-prepared ones, but because we're running on a bit, I suggest we cut that. If you do have any questions, you have the contact details for Roger, for Gavin, and for myself. It's obviously an SAP product, so please talk to your SAP account team if you need more details as well. And of course, all of us at Integrity that know you are happy to pick up on that. A couple of things just to finish with. We've recorded this event, so it'll be available on our website in about 24 hours or so. So do have a look at that if you want to listen again and share it with anybody. Also, please do register so you hear about all our webinars and briefings. The next one we're going to do will be after GRC 2015 in Nice, which is just about a couple of weeks away. We'll run through what the highlights there, what we heard at the event, what the market was talking about, what people seem to be doing, any announcements that were made, and we'll try and explore what they're all about and so on, and just give an update for those of you not able to go to it. If you're looking at the website, there's a lot of other useful material there. One thing that we put on fairly recently is our 2015 survey. So we've gone to 100 companies around Europe to ask how they're using GRC and what are the issues that are driving them to do various things and what parts they use and so on. Available on the website, it's a free download, so please do go and have a look. There's some very interesting stuff in there, and we try to use a lot more infographics to really draw out some of the key points rather than just have boring material. Other things in there, presentations from previous sessions that we've run about access control, for example, case studies, quite a lot of material on that. So I hope you found the event was useful and it inspired some thoughts. As I say, you've got the contacts there for further information. When we finish this, we'll send you a short survey just to see is this webinar useful and what do you think about how long it takes and what sort of topics you might like us to cover in future. We're very keen to keep investing this as a way of sharing our ideas. And I hope you found that useful. Thanks again to Roger for taking part and putting the effort into those slides. Thank you all for listening, and we look forward to catching up with you again next time. Thank you and goodbye.